flexibility and hypertrophy can't go together, right? This is something that we're gonna dive deep into, and we're gonna start right now. So what is muscular hypertrophy? We'll run through this pretty quickly because I know most of you dudes and women have seen what hypertrophy is in our recent videos. So hypertrophy is muscular growth. And if we look at it, there's gonna be three specific types of hypertrophy. That first key will be myofibrillar hypertrophy. This is something that might be achieved by doing 10 sets of 10 back squats, or 5 sets of 3 followed by 2 sets of 5, something like this, where we're just getting stupid strong. Then you've got sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. This is what you feel and is achieved when you're getting the pump, when you're doing 5 sets of 17, or you're doing the 80-60 drop. That's something that we've shared with you guys recently. Check out that video. Now, the other third aspect is connective tissue hypertrophy. This is about 10 to 15% of our hypertrophy level. So this occurs with an increase in size in our tendons, our ligaments, and it's gonna help us have better structural integrity so that we can keep getting a little bit more muscular with that sarcoplasmic or myofibrillar hypertrophy. And then finally, the way this occurs will be through things like muscle damage and mechanical tension. So what is flexibility? Seriously, what is it? Flexibility is the ability of a joint or a series of joints to move through a range of motion, to move through a pain-free range of motion without there being any type of inhibition. In the strength world, flexibility tends to get a bad rep. People tend to think of a gangly, patchouli smelling, granola eating, lacking muscle yoga instructor. And in all reality, there's nothing wrong with smelling like patchouli or eating granola or doing yoga, but we do need to have some muscle. This negative connotation sort of reminds me of the opposition on the other side of the spectrum, the don't get too big and bulky argument. It's almost as though the strength world and the sports performance world has created these two opposite ends of the spectrum. You have Joel Seedman over here, who might be the gangly, granola eating, patchouli smelling dude, versus Ronnie Coleman all the way over here, and there's no in between. And it's who's gonna win in the fight? The guy who's more mobile and a little bit more flexible, or the guy who's big and bulky? And the whole debate is that there can't be any in between Ronnie Coleman and Joel Seedman. By the way, who the would win in a fight between Ronnie Coleman and Joel Seedman? Comment down below with who you think. Where can we start with flexibility and hypertrophy? What about a discussion on ranges of motion? Ooh. Bloomquist and Carlson did an entire research project where they took 17 individuals and they compared that short range of motion back squat to a full range of motion back squat. And anecdotally, many people see a loss of range of motion or a loss of mobility and flexibility when they're just training in shorter ranges of motion. And so over 12 weeks, they took 17 of these dudes and they had a portion of them squat to 60 degrees and they had another portion of them squat to 120 degrees. And the first thing that came into my mind was, imagine being the dude squatting in a commercial gym going to 60 degrees. And they were looking at things like strength gains, muscular structure, so the actual size of the muscle, and even jump performance. And this was all assessed before the experiment started and then after the experiment was done. And so of course the deep squat group got swole in most of these tests. The shallow squat group really didn't see any improvements in any of their testing modalities. One of the interesting factors as well is that training through full range of motion and being more flexible led to bigger quad development. So maybe because I have extremely small quads, I should be squatting to full range of motion more frequently. The deep squat group also saw a greater performance in all of these tests when compared to the shallow squat group. So that longer range of motion group showed better benefits, likely because they achieved greater levels of muscular damage. They had more mechanical tension. Think if you're going through a longer range of motion, you will be under more mechanical tension. You will also be subject to a longer eccentric period, which can possibly lead to more muscular damage and in turn, more muscular size and strength. Activation of muscles can be different through various ranges of motion. And I think that's why it's important to train partial ranges of motion and full range of motion for different types of adaptation, depending upon what you're working towards. And this is seen in another study from Kubo and Yata, where they took 17 other dudes, and I don't know why both of these studies have 17 dudes, but what a great number. And then they compare that over a 10-week time frame where they analyze different squat ranges of motion and what that muscular stimulation looks like. So they took these individuals through different ranges of motion. Some of them went to half squat, some of them went to full range of motion. And the main thing that they wanted to look for was what type of activation do they see in their hamstrings? What type of activation might they see in their quads and in their glutes? So in the research from Kubo, the full squatters saw a much greater improvement in their overall strength. Now, the interesting part here is the rectus femoris and the hamstrings. Neither of those muscles increased in size in either group. And what's ironic with this is I remember growing up and my dad talking about the rectus femoris and that you only can really stimulate it by doing leg presses and leg extensions. And now I think he might actually be right. Now, there are other muscles that are known as knee extensors, and in the full range of motion group, the full squat group, that's where we saw a substantial increase in muscular strength and muscular size, especially compared to the partial range of motion squatters. Also, inside of the full range of motion athletes, the adductors, okay, so think adductors are groin. That's where we saw a large increase in muscular size and in muscular strength. And in the glutes. In the glutes, there was a massive increase in muscular structure in the full range of motion squatters. Have you ever looked at the glutes of Olympic weightlifters? We have seen with leg muscle hypertrophy that training through a full range of motion actually leads to better leg development. Here are 3 specific keys that you can use to lengthen the muscle. First key, obviously, you should train full range of motion. So the next thing that you can do is do 10 to 15 minutes of mobility work to help keep your muscle tone nice and limber as you increase that muscle mass. And this is something that I didn't do for about 10 to 12 years that I probably should have done because now I'm extremely tight. And then finally, one thing that you can do is an absolutely wild hypertrophy-based training session. So let's say you come in, you do 45 to 60 minutes of just insane hypertrophy work. You're under tension, you're doing full range of motion, you're doing partial range of motion, you're doing cheat curls, you're doing crazy to get a monster pump. And then that next day, you do 45 to 60 minutes of yoga to help with recovery and lengthen that muscle belly. Oh, my biceps. So in conclusion, to stop being small, we need to train through full ranges of motion. We also do need to train in partial range of motion, but while we're doing that, we also need to really focus on our flexibility. If we improve our flexibility, we can have longer ranges of motion. If we have longer ranges of motion, we have more mechanical tension. If we have more mechanical tension, we can also very likely have more muscle damage. Full range of motion elbow extension leads to swole triceps. So if you've never trained in full range of motion, and you have no idea what you should be doing to improve your overall strength and performance, you can pick up our app, Peak Strength. You can head to peakstrength.app today to get those gains rolling. And if you want more of those brain gains, make sure you check out our podcast channel, Masters of Sport Podcast. Because remember, freaks, if you guys want to become champions, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.